Tonight we're in Dartford in Kent, at the grammar school where Mick Jagger was a pupil. Welcome to Question Time. And good evening to you at home, good evening to our audience here. Welcome to our panel. The Conservative International Development Secretary, Justine Greening, Labour's Deputy Leader, Harriet Harman, Liberal Democrat peer, Shirley Williams, the broadcaster and Observer columnist, Victoria Coren, and the historian, David Starkey. And Roger Brindle has our first question. Mr. Brindle.
Will the clowns and fruitcakes have the last laugh?
Will the clowns and fruitcakes have the last laugh? Of course, UKIP as described variously by the Prime Minister and by Ken Clarke. Shirley Williams.
Well, they may have the last laugh, but I think they have been played up a huge amount in the press. It's worth remembering that they still haven't got a single parliamentary seat of any kind. And I think a great deal of what they're trading in is the feeling that people have, understandably, in the middle of a serious economic problem, of being really frustrated and disappointed. And what essentially I think UKIP does, and I've read their manifesto and it's a very curious one, is to trade on that. I don't think they're going to last that long. I may be wrong, but I think that what they're doing essentially is trading on protest, and that they don't have anything very solid to say about the problems that really face the country.
David Starkey.
Well, I detect a powerful note of jealousy in what Shirley has just said, because, of course, traditionally, the Lib Dems were the receptacle for rubbish votes and the protest vote. So, obviously, there's a certain degree of jealousy. I don't think they will have the laugh in this election. I think they may very well have a very large laugh at the next general election. And I think they represent something much more profound than what Shirley has said. They represent a sense of deep-seated disenchantment. Most of you are political junkies. Most of the country isn't. And if we just look at this panel now, forgive me whilst I go round, we have an hereditary journalist, comedian.
That's how it works, it's hereditary.
Indeed, we have an hereditary broadcaster,
no, you
presenter.
Don't.
Yes, you do.
Don't.
No, let's
anyway, leave me out of it. Talk about
come on. You're very much part of this. You two are the daughter of a line of Harley Street physicians. You're a cousin of Antonia Fraser. You're Vera Britton's daughter. Now, in other words, there are only two of us here who came up from Nat, Justine and me, and we're both on the right. There is this awful sense of politics as a cosy club. Now, you can get away with it when you've got an aristocracy, okay, in the past. If you're also pretending to be a democracy, then this sort of cosy, inbred, liberal, pat on the back, it's all right. The Ken Clarke remark, the contempt for the mere orders, saying things that rather a lot of people believe.
I think we should respect the views of people who are thinking of voting for UKIP, and I don't think we should simply discount their concerns. I do think that as they have become a bigger party in a sense, they will get more scrutiny, and I think people will start to work out for themselves whether they feel there's any substance underneath some of the rhetoric they've heard. But I think the bottom line is today's elections are about your local council and who's going to be providing your local services, how much you're going to pay them for that. And I think time after time you can see that Conservative councils have lower council tax. I think you've had a 3-year freeze here, better services, and it's actually in tune with what people want. They want good quality services, but they don't want to have to pay the earth for them. They want them to be affordable. And I think that's really what this election is about, and I hope that people will go out and vote for good quality services
the
and low
election's
council tax.
The election's over, so you don't need to do that pitch. But just tell me this: your colleagues in the coalition, Nick Clegg, says the Tories are pulling to the right in an attempt to appease people because of UKIP. True or false?
I don't think that's true at all. I think it goes back to what David said. I think once you start getting really disconnected from the public and you start just discounting what people say, I think think you get yourself into a dangerous position. I think.
So was the Prime Minister wrong to call them fruitcakes, loonies and closet racists?
Well, I'm not going to make a judgment about UKIP voters, but I think at the end of the day, I think we have been willing to look really seriously at what voters in Britain are saying, and I think a lot of things we're trying to do as a government is responding to that on cost of living, on making sure that services are good, but also fixing our financial problems. And I think, as I said at the beginning, I think as people take more of a look at UKIP, they will be able to form their own opinion, really, about whether there's any substance underneath the policies.
Okay.
I personally don't think there is, but I think it's up to voters to decide, obviously.
You, sir, in the third row.
I think whoever's in power, the people would like that they just make good on their manifesto, whether it's UKIP, the Raving Loony Party, Conservative, that they keep to their pledge of their manifesto, because it seems that we're all disenchanted that you get our votes through the manifesto and then everything changes after.
Do you think that's one of the reasons UKIP seems popular?
Yeah.
Because they have
very hard to make good on their manifesto, but the major parties need to honour their pledge, basically.
And you?
Yeah, I completely agree with David Starkey.
I think that's the first time that's ever been said.
The political class, they just represent something alien to most people, and UKIP are something that people can relate to. They're plain talking, they mean what they say, and they've got, they're just genuine. And what the Conservatives tried to do to UKIP, like that smear campaign, was trying to go through their Facebook and Twitter accounts, trying to find the stuff, and they found like 0.3% of their candidates with rubbish on them. If you went through Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, you probably find exactly the same thing. I think it's disgraceful, and I voted Conservative for general election, but I'll never do it again. I'll never do it again, and you'll be grovelling for UKIP in the next election.
The lady here in the front.
I have been able to vote now for coming up to 50 years, and I can honestly say that this period of time I have never met so many people who don't know which way to vote. Everybody in the past was all very certain how they wanted to vote, and you had a small handful that were the don't knows. But now, having been a Conservative all my voting life, I don't know who I want to vote for now. And I think people and UKIP are going to gather up the votes of those people who have had enough with the whole of the parties that are available.
This lot.
And it will be a vote for, we don't know what you're doing and we don't know what he's doing, but we might as well vote for UKIP.
Did you do that today?
I did.
Okay. and the man at the very back there on the gang.
Can we have a straw poll, David?
No.
Oh.
Man out there.
Oh, spoil sport, right.
As a local resident, I've heard very little from any of our local MPs with today's election. Nigel Farage from the UKIP was in Dartford town centre today speaking with residents. He's going to win votes from you if you do not get out and speak to your local residents.
Okay. Harriet Harman.
Well, I met many people around and about on the campaign trail saying that they were thinking of considering voting for UKIP, or they were definitely going to vote for UKIP. And what I definitely got the sense of is that it wasn't because they wanted UKIP's economic policies and they wanted them to be in charge of the economy, or they thought Nigel Farage would do a good job of running the health service, but basically, as you said, a feeling of disaffection, disenchantment. And one couple I met said, I don't agree with most of what UKIP said, but I'm making a protest. But I think that doesn't mean we should write that off or call it a rubbish vote. I think we should listen very seriously if people are feeling disaffected and disenchanted. And it is a challenge to us. It's a wake-up call for us to actually listen to people who feel that times are hard and wonder whether any of us have actually got the answers. And that is a task for us to respond to that challenge. But thank you very much, David. Don't you patronise me and tell me I've had anything handed to me on a plate. I tell you, if you are trying to be a woman in politics, there was only 3% women in the House of Commons. When I came into the House of Commons, it was a men-only club, and I had to fight to actually get myself in and to get other women in too, so women could be spoken up for. So thank you very much, but don't condescend to me on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I just make one response? I wasn't condescending, I was describing. You did indeed fight for women, but you fought most effectively for middle-class women like yourself, because exactly the way female liberation has worked, and I wholeheartedly support it, is disproportionately in favour of rich, well-connected women like you.
Absolutely not. That is absolutely not.
It is absolutely true. No, you're both
David,
wrong.
I fought for maternity pay and leave for women whose husbands actually couldn't afford for them to be staying at home off work.
Girls in the city do best out of that, like my sister-in-law.
No, I fought for childcare for women.
She does best out of it. Rich women in the city make this like mad.
Wrong. That is so wrong.
It's so right.
What about equal pay for women who are actually doing ordinary manual jobs and didn't get the same pay as men? That is an absolute rubbish, and that's why I'm in the Labour Party and not in the Tories.
We'll go back to UKIP.
Maybe go back to the question.
Thank you.
Yes.
We'll go back to UKIP. And I want to go to the man in the green shirt, then I come to you, Victoria. Yes, the man in the green shirt there. Yes, sir.
We won't know till tomorrow about UKIP. And most of the main parties don't seem to keep their promises anyway. They make these promises, they don't keep them, or they change their minds, or they put them off till the next election or something
and
like
you include UKIP in that as well, or not?
I did vote, yes, but I didn't vote UKIP.
But do you include UKIP, or do you think they do have policies?
Well, I do include.
You do include them?
Yes.
Victoria Coren.
Well, look, I'm still stunned by David Starkey's opening comment. It's true, I became a writer because my father was one and I wanted to impress him.
And your brother is.
It seemed noble and fun. I didn't realise it would make people vote UKIP. It's a level of responsibility I'm going to have to think about. And it's true, I mean, few people, you must be sympathetic with Harriet Harman, because few people have done as much for working class women as you have yourself, David.
Sorry, I really won't be patronised. My mother scrubbed floors for a living. And when I have
and you've done so much for women since. Anyway, I'll carry on. I think the problem with calling people clowns and fruitcakes, this panel accepted, I was very angry to hear the people from UKIP described as clowns and fruitcakes, just because I think it is the lowest form of political discourse. To call your opponents mad is lazy and annoying, and it's a refusal to engage. It's just like saying don't vote for UKIP, they're ugly. It's childish and it's annoying. I also don't like the denigrating of the protest vote. A lot of people were saying, oh, but it's just a protest vote. Like that's nothing. We live in a democracy. It's great that we can have a protest vote. The ballot box is where people should make their opinions felt. Violent protests aren't wanted. Peaceful protests are ignored. Protest votes are what it's all about.
In the third row from back, you were there. Yes.
Me?
Yes.
Oh. To avoid protest votes being so extreme, wouldn't it be better if voting was compulsory, and then everybody would have a say and we'd have a proper view in this country?
Okay, and the man in the green shirt up there, another green shirt, yes.
I think the Conservatives are running scared. So for so long the elections have been won by controlling the centre ground, and they've taken the fringes for granted. And now they've got a right-wing alternative which makes them feel like a squeezed middle.
So, so Labour will be the beneficiary of UKIP, Harriet Harman, is the consequence of that argument?
Well,
the logic of it?
I don't think we want to be the beneficiary of a party which is trying to pull politics further to the right. And I actually think that there are people who've previously voted Labour who feel disaffected and to want to be given a more positive reason to trust us and to feel that we've got the answers to the problems in difficult times. So I don't take the easy assumption, oh, well, it's great because it's going to take votes off the Conservatives. I think some of their politics is quite threatening, and I think we shouldn't be complacent either.
Okay. I'll take one more point. The person there, bang in the middle. There, yes, you.
I think for years the people of this country have made, the various political parties have made promises and just broken them, and we have seen this happening for years and years and years. And I think now what's happening with UKIP, they appear to be making statements that people feel very much in harmony with. And I think the danger with a lot of these sort of fringe parties is they come along, They play to the audience, they take away the vote from perhaps the more major parties, and then they divide and split, and then we get what we've had recently, which is the coalition government, and then you don't really get much agreement anywhere. And I think if everybody listened to the fact that, yes, people are very disaffected in this country, they are sick to death of hearing politicians making promises and then breaking them. And I think they want to see something coming from the main political parties. And I think this is an opportunity for all of those political parties to really sit up, take note and listen and get together and really come up with some real plans that is going to make a difference to this country and the people living within it.
Do you recognise this description?
I think that...
Her description of you?
I think we have stuck to our promises, actually. I think we have set about reducing the deficit. We have started to rebalance the economy. We have started to sort out the welfare system. We started to sort out the immigration system. On all of those things, I have to say, Labour have voted against it and stood in our way, but we got on with it. And you know what? It is difficult. I'm not surprised people finding it difficult. It is a tough time. We're going through a really difficult time as a country because we took over in such a hole. But I believe we're on the right track, and I think what we need to do is stay the course, hold our nerve, but I think we should also realise that this is a really difficult time for people, and we've really worked hard to try and tackle things like cost of living.
Okay.
But with the deficit as it is, we're working with a really low budget, and we've got to live within our means like everyone else, but we are trying to make sure we get that balance right.
All right. Let's go on to a question that is about living within our means. From Janet Munro, please. Janet Munro.
Should wealthy pensioners hand back their bus passes?
One of the ideas being put forward by Ian Duncan Smith, I think, that if you don't want the benefits you get when you're old, you can afford not to take them, give them back. Victoria Coren, should wealthy pensioners hand back bus passes, and indeed their heating allowance and all the rest of it?
They absolutely must not. The heating allowance is a slightly different thing. The bus passes, it's one of those very rare in the modern age, simple ideas that make people happy. As I observe it, people, when they reach the age where they get a free bus pass, it sort of brings them glee. It's a little treat. It's like it used to be the telegram from the Queen. When my father got his bus pass, he never really travelled by bus, but he just loved it. He started getting buses everywhere and going to new places, and it's something that makes people happy, and I think the idea of going on buses and going to new places is very important in that the wider problem is that we don't live in an age-integrated society. If you go out somewhere like sort of Portugal, you will see 80-year-olds and 5-year-olds at dinner together at 10 o'clock at night. And we don't. It's a culture sort of run by the young. Television is run by the young, and technology, and it's all about the sort of the healthy and the beautiful and the people that are just starting out in life. And it's like they want to shove old people sort of off-screen, out of the working market, into sort of sheltered housing on the edge of towns. And if a bus pass is going to get people hopping about, going to new places, moving about with other people, and make older people sort of visible and active, it's vital that not a single old person gives theirs back.
Shirley Williams.
Well, my only disagreement with Victoria is that I think old persons are no longer old at 60. So there's a real question, if we're stuck for money, about whether we should raise the age at which it starts. I inclined to agree with you. I think asking people to hand it back is really putting tremendous pressure on people, and that's not fair because you'd single them out. It's like white feathers in the war. People would be singled out for not having handed it back. So I agree with you. I like your picture of bus passes. I whiz around in railways all the time because of the 1/3 reduction, very posh. But what I do think is that we do have to spend one moment thinking about the cost of it, which is quite high. And my own view would be that we probably should start later, because we're all living to about 90 now, and that just means it's a very, very large commitment.
But does the bus pass cost anything? The heating allowance, yes, it does seem a bit strange to send £200 to a sort of millionaire pensioner. I don't quite understand that. But bus passes isn't about giving money away. It's spaces on buses to be used in the daytime. It's not money.
Well, then everybody could travel free on that argument.
Yes, they could.
Why does anybody pay? Just have free buses.
And the government does pay for it. The government does pay for it. It pays very large sums to the bus companies.
You said at the inn.
I'd like to know what the definition of a rich pensioner is.
A lot of nodding to that.
Yeah. You know, the other week they were talked about the benefits, the limit for a single person, £350 a week. Well, the old age pension's £142 a week. So it doesn't make me a rich pensioner. Why should I give my bus pass back? I worked 47 years and paid my taxes. This is my payback.
Do you think there was this proposal that benefits for pensioners should be taxed, so richer pensioners will give the money back. Do you approve of that?
Yeah.
You would have that?
Yes, on the whole, I do. I don't think I would like the bus passes, though. I agree with Victoria about bus passes.
Okay.
I think it's great that old people should wander around.
You do, dear, you do. Yes.
David Starkey.
No, actually, no.
I think that the point that David's just made now, that they should be taxed, is absolutely unchallengeable, because that then deals with the gentleman there. It's not a question of a sort of dividing line of rich and poor. It's simply that we should all be subject to the same regime of tax, which all political parties now agree on, and very definitely the heating allowance, the television licence and all the rest of it should simply be taxed. That would solve the entire problem. Means testing is a really bad idea because it's very expensive and it's invidious. But what I think is there's a bigger problem behind all of this, which is what Gordon Brown did. Everybody talks about heating allowances and the bus pass as though it was immemorial, as though it was part of some national settlement that harks back to Clement Attlee and all the rest of it. It doesn't. It was invented by that catastrophic Chancellor of the Exchequer to try to drag everybody into the welfare net. In other words, almost the definition of being a citizen now is to receive something from the state. We've seen it with the whole question of women and child allowances. There's hands go up if you don't get one. Now, this seems to me to be fundamentally wrong. The first question that we debated, and I thought we debated very reflectively, and the audience too. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a major national crisis. Full stop. We're in a financial crisis, we're in a fiscal crisis, and we're in an economic crisis. That is to say, Britain is not paying its way. Justine produced this amazingly bland thing. We're trying to live within our means. Ladies and gentlemen, the government at the moment is borrowing £120 billion a year and rising. We are the most heavily indebted major economy. Sorry, frivolities like Victoria's sort of little riff on bus passes are completely beside the point.
What's your solution, Dave? To just sort of scrap the welfare state? We can't really afford it and die in the road.
We need... No, but what we need to do, we've got to look at it very hard. We've got to look at it with much more serious and creative policies, above all about education.
And taking away an old person's bus pass is your idea of a serious creative policy. You think this £120 billion deficit will be solved if the old people just sit in their living room watching the television?
OK, David, hold on a second. Harriet Harman, come in on this.
Well, I think there's an underlying, very deep truth in what Victoria said in what was patronising called a little riff by David there. The point is we want people who are retired to be out and about. We don't want them to be stuck indoors on their own, getting increasingly isolated. And actually getting people... The freedom of the buses means that they're out and about, they're seeing people, and they're not becoming isolated. So it's a thoroughly good thing, and that's why we introduced it. And as far as the winter fuel payment is concerned, the reason why we introduced it was not to suck everybody into the welfare state. But when we came into government, there was a real problem of pensioner poverty, and particularly people not being able to afford their heating bills. So at that point, that was one of the things that we introduced.
And the problem with the benefits...
Sorry, David, I'm
like
actually speaking. If you just let me finish speaking. The problem with the benefit bill is not actually to make... The way to solve the benefit bill is not to make people on benefits worse off, but to have fewer people on benefits. And that's why we should have a major programme to get economic growth and to get people working again. And that's the way you solve the problem of the deficit.
The woman up there, you go. Yes.
I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of so-called rich pensioners these days have spent 47, 50 years working and paying in to the government coffers. To give them a free bus pass and a paltry £200 a year is probably fair recompense for what they've put into the system over the years. And also, if they feel that strongly that they shouldn't be receiving that money, it would be far better spent by giving to charity, Age UK, etc., rather than back into the government coffers to just be squandered on something else.
Justine Greening, do you want to pick up on what David Starkey said about you and your attitude to the deficit?
Well, until we get the deficit down, we will still have to borrow each year. That's essentially, the deficit means that, in a sense, we're loss-making as a country. So until we get to break even, we will have to keep borrowing. And actually, the key thing we've got to do is make sure that the markets realise that we've got a plan to fix our problems.
But sorry, Justine, you manifestly don't.
If you can let me
you're
finish,
borrowing
David.
more and more. You were asked to answer a specific question.
We've got the deficit down by a third. We started off with one of the highest ones in the developed world, so we're moving in the right direction. That's one of the reasons why our interest rates have been able to stay low. That's helped millions of mortgage holders right the way across our country. On the welfare state, in spite of all of those financial challenges, we promised we would protect pensioner benefits, and we have. We've kept that promise precisely for many of the reasons that have been set out. And on welfare, we have made £85 billion of savings. Labour have opposed them all. And I'll tell you what we need to do with the welfare system. It's have a system that actually makes work pay instead of penalising people financially for going back into work when they're on benefits. And that's what we've changed.
Universal credit's going to do, actually,
going back to
unfortunately.
pensions, and there has actually been a substantial increase in pensions under the coalition. Pensioners in some ways have been the best protected of all. What I'm worried about is that I think unless we find some way of getting many, many more young people back to work, we're not going to create a sense of, as it were, the capacity to put this country right. And I think we've got to address that issue. And if I may say so, I think Labour has tried. I'll give them credit for that. I don't think it's going to work, the so-called guaranteed wage, but I think the idea behind it is one that we should actually commend, because we really have to address some of the new ideas now.
The woman up there on the left.
I'd just like to say, as a young person who lives in London in full-time education, I also have a free bus pass, and I absolutely love my Oyster card. It literally has made the world my oyster. However, I often get on the bus and find that I'm surrounded by either people my age or older people, and I've often wondered if I made, or we all made, a small contribution to our journey, if the cost of people that don't have these privileges came down, if it would be a more viable option, because obviously there is a real environmental argument for using public transport, among other arguments.
Your buses are full of young people and very old people.
Yeah.
Just the two.
Nobody paying anything.
Literally
yes.
just the two.
Yes. All right. Let's go on to another question. Just before I do, you can just remind you can join us. Of course you can. Text and Twitter. You know all that. If you're at home, hashtag BBCQT. Follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments to 83981, press the red button to see what others are saying. But one other thing, in a month's time, just over a month, on the 13th of June, we're having a special question time from Edinburgh, and the audience is going to be made up only of 16 and 17-year-olds, because that is the group that is getting the vote for the first time in the UK on the Scottish independence referendum next year. So if you're 16 or 17, want to come and take part, go to our website and apply. The date is June the 13th, and the programme will come from Edinburgh. And the next question comes from Nicola Constable, please.
Is the British public's insatiable appetite for cheap clothing indirectly responsible for the factory disaster in Bangladesh?
Victoria Coren.
I do think something awfully strange has happened in the last sort of maybe 20, 30 years, where people, I mean women really, because I think whatever the magazines tell you, men aren't interested in clothes, but women have simultaneously lost the ability to make clothes, but gained an incredible greed for having more and more and more of them, which is a really unfortunate combination. I'm not terribly interested in clothes. I think I'm quite old-fashioned about it. I might buy one or two nice, good quality things a year. But I think people have been persuaded to believe, in our generation it's Sex and the City, previously it was Mary Quant, persuaded to believe that there is such a thing as a season, and that 4 times a year you have to buy a whole lot of clothes for the new season.
I wasn't asking for a diatribe about fashion. The question was about the people who were burnt to death in a factory in Bangladesh.
Yes, but the lady asked about the
yeah,
British
but whether this is the cause of it.
Ability well, I would say, so this thing where people want more and more clothes and they don't know how to make them has caused a gap where in rushes all these firms who can provide you with huge numbers of cheap clothes. I don't know about this particular factory, but certainly one does hear that there are sweatshops and people crammed in and on minimum wages and having a terrible time, and it is all to feed this huge appetite. And I think perhaps if people thought, I'm going to buy fewer things, or if I want 100 things a year, I'll make my own, they would know where the things were being made. And at least if something like that did happen, you wouldn't feel you might be personally responsible.
OK. Justine Greening.
I think when people buy very low-cost clothes, they have to ask themselves how come they've been able to be made and sold at such a low price. But I think the thing that killed those people in Bangladesh was poor building regulations and the fact there clearly wasn't anybody checking whether that building was safe. I think that companies who are involved in purchasing those sorts of clothes can have a role in making sure their supply chains work better and are more responsible. And one of the things my department tries to do, and is going to try and do more of, is help companies develop responsible supply chains. And I think that can help, but ultimately the problem that you saw in Bangladesh was one of just bad building regulations and nobody enforcing good standards.
The children were there. Why were the women taking their children to work? Why was there not any childcare? Why didn't they have enough money to have somebody else?
Because it's Bangladesh, woman. For God's sake, do you know what a country like that is like?
Yes, I've been there, and I have to say loudly and clearly that we do have some responsibility.
Absolutely.
You simply cannot watch what happened in Bangladesh, which I think was unspeakable, go on happening. Now, we've already moved on fair trade. Firms like Sainsbury's and Waitrose and so on now clearly market fair trade products. Go and look. You'll see fair trade coffee, you'll see fair trade chocolate, you'll see fair trade other things. And all of us who buy know what that means is that somebody has taken some responsibility for where these products come from. Now, in the case of Primark and the other big companies that are selling these very cheap clothes, they can perfectly well go out and see whether they're obeying the regulations that probably are being disregarded all the time. I don't think we can stand there on one side and say, what a shame this all was, what a pity. We have, as major buyers, some responsibility. And I think that some responsibility means that in bloody Bangladesh, David, we can do something to improve the situation, and I believe we should.
We have to recognise as well, though, that people buy cheap clothes because that's what they can afford, in the same way that people buy basics lines instead of fair trade, because they can't afford to buy more expensive things. And when we have manufacturers and clothing stores who are actually selling things quite expensively and still using those sweatshops, that's even more immoral.
But you see, you can't forget that's a little bit of a trick of our economy, I think. You say that people buy these clothes, it's all they can afford. If they want to buy so many clothes, it's a bit like meat. We've been persuaded we want meat every day, and then we have it 99p lasagna, and we think, oh, well, there can't be anything wrong with this, how delicious. It turns out to have horse in it.
Can we just get away from clothes?
The economy demands for us to want more and more and more things. We want more clothes than we need.
Really, it's not just clothes, it's everything. Our entire economy rests on the sweatshops of China and India. Everything. It's called, I'm afraid, globalisation. And the great catastrophe that we are facing, of course, is that in a globalised world, nice companies like Sainsbury's are in a minority. Very nasty companies, I'm afraid, like Apple, are in a majority. And this is one of the reasons why our economic crisis is as bad as it is. What is going to happen, and it's happening everywhere, is that wages and social welfare will be driven down to the lowest denominator, the lowest common denominator. That is the pressure. And we're Canute-like if we think we can stop this happening here without tariffs.
All right.
Globalisation is rapidly turning into a disaster.
All right, said Harriet Harman.
I think to say it's an inevitable outcome is absolutely of globalisation is completely wrong. I mean,
the evidence is on my side.
What this was, I don't think that this was about inadequate building regulations. It was about total exploitation of workers who saw the cracks in the building but just did not have the power or the ability
to walk out because they just are absolutely ground down and exploited. And the way to protect them and prevent that happening, which nobody who buys clothes here wants to feel that that is actually happening, is to have strong international organisations like the International Labour Organisation. If they had strong...
China and India, what are you talking about?
We need common standards to protect
China and
workers.
India. Sorry, this is why politicians are so absurd. Have you been to China recently?
It's not just shouting country names and thinking other people will also roll their eyes like you and think, oh, they must be morons.
No.
Why not China and India?
Because you think the answer is tariffs. I think it is respect and dignity for workers, whichever country they happen to be in. You might think that's pie in the sky, but I believe that.
In case you haven't noticed, a workers' party is in charge in China. It's called the Communist Party. And it has engineered an economic boom which depends, as all historic industrial revolutions, including ours, on cheap labour. Do you think they're going to pass up the chance to multiply their economy in the way that they're doing? No, they won't. All the things you're talking about, Harriet, I value and I agree with. But if you have the desperate poverty of China or Bangladesh, they're a luxury. The thing that we should be going for in Bangladesh, there was one woman pulled out only at the cost of losing her hands. And she said, why wasn't it my legs? And then I would still be able to work to look after my family. She was in tears because she knew as she could not work, she would starve and her children would starve.
And if you impose tariffs, there will be even less work than there is.
But then equally, I'm sorry, nations only have interests. They do not have friends.
Justine Greening.
But this is precisely why we need to work with countries like Bangladesh to help them develop their economy, to do that responsibly and to provide them with some of the technical support so that they can have the regulatory scheme in place so that we can have proper protection for people who are workers. But I think simply saying that we should shut up shop and not have a global economy that gives some of these economies and people chance to actually be prosperous, I just don't think that's the solution.
No, I agree with you, but sorry, it's a really terrible, it's a paradox. And we're in a situation, ladies and gentlemen, where there are no easy solutions, you see. This is what's frightening. We've lived through a world, you and I, where on the whole there seemed to be very easy solutions. Everybody was getting richer all the time. We're not. The gravy train has suddenly ground to a terrible halt. No country has yet successfully industrialised without exploiting labour.
But
That's
David,
how every country has done it.
There's a very boring fact we have to bring in here, which doesn't go with what you're saying. The biggest drops in poverty in the world in the last 10 years have been in India and China.
Yes.
Millions of people lifted out of fundamental poverty and a lot of trade going on to places like Vietnam and Indonesia because they can no longer undersell these even poorer countries. So while I agree with you, globalisation throws up with new challenges, I very much more strongly agree with the position taken by Harriet and by Justine, and that is that you can actually do something effective about it. And I think your touching story about the lady without the hands tells us that we have to try and deal with that and not just moan about it and say that we can't do anything except impose tariffs.
The woman up there on the left, you said, yes.
I'd just like to bring in a point I don't think we've touched on yet.
Yes.
We've mentioned cheap clothes, but what about expensive clothes? It's not just the companies that provide cheap clothes, such as Primark. I mean, a couple of years ago, there was a big scandal with Nike. Nike were using the sweatshops all over Asia, all over China, all over India. And I don't know if you've seen the price of a pair of Nike trainers, but they aren't cheap.
And you, sir, in front.
I'm a business academic and author, and I've travelled extensively in India, and I find myself caught between wanting to agree with David Starkey and Harriet Harman and Shirley Williams all at the same time. The pragmatism of David Starkey, if you've travelled in those places, unfortunately he's right about just allowing capitalism to go on. We actually read the labels on the thing. We know that the stuff is, if it's cheap, it's cheap as chips. It's monkeys, and if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So we know that. We actually don't act upon it as buyers is one thing. So self-regulation through buying, free trade is necessary, but it's not sufficient to give the kind of guarantees. I also, unfortunately, think if we start introducing tariffs, Harriet, that of course we will get the result that we deserve. I think we need to actually do something quite different to encourage the whole of the world to come up a little bit, so that we don't end up into this spiral of capitalism which is destroying the planet.
Yeah. I don't think Harriet was in favour of tariffs. It was David Starkey.
But no, I'm just worried about the poor here. I'm awfully sorry. I'm worried about the poor here first.
You, sir.
I'm English. Sorry.
We'll go on to another question. From Elizabeth Wakefield. A blockbuster, this one.
Is the NHS safe in this government's hands?
An old cry about the NHS. Is it safe in this government's hands? Harriet Harman, do you think the NHS is safe?
I don't think the NHS is safe with the Tories, and whatever they say and whatever facts and figures they purport to come out with, I just remember the time when they were in government before and the Conservatives were running the health service, and people in my constituency would actually die on hospital waiting lists. And I'll never forget a moment where a cardiac surgeon showed me his operations list that was up on the wall with names and addresses of my constituents on it. And he said, 25% of these people will die before I get to operate on them because the waiting lists are so long. And when we over and over again said to Tory ministers, you must put some more money into the health service because people who can't afford to go private die on waiting lists. They were not interested and they didn't care. And I'm afraid from
But this was before your 13 years in office, was it you're talking about?
Yes, and we
a long time ago.
Yeah, but we invested massively in the National Health Service and people did not then die on waiting lists. And I'm afraid whatever they say, from that moment of just knowing the Tories do not care about people who depend on the National Health Service and who can't afford to go private, I'm afraid people can make up their own minds on this, but my mind is made up. I would never trust the Tories on the health service, and that's one of the big reasons I want to see them out next time and us back into government.
Justine Greening?
I totally disagree with that. We've protected the NHS budget. That's another promise that we have kept. That policy has been described as irresponsible by your shadow health secretary,
top-down reorganisation costing £3 billion.
If I can have my say, we've absolutely seen waiting lists lower. It's in Wales, actually, where Labour is running the NHS, where we're seeing targets missed. We have given people more access to cancer treatments. We've got more midwives, we've got more health workers, and we've got more of those being trained to come on prior to the next election over the next few years. So we are absolutely investing in the NHS and we are developing it. And we are making sure that it can evolve so that it can meet the healthcare needs of our country going forward. But it's been one of our priorities and it will stay one of our priorities.
Shirley Williams, do you recognise the picture that Harriet Harman painted?
I'm talking about the NHS and the House of Lords almost every day. Both parties have got quite a lot to answer for. Now, it's perfectly true that Labour put more money into the NHS and it reduced the waiting list times. It's also true that when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister, Labour allowed an 11% greater payment to the private sector than to the NHS. And perhaps the most important single thing is that it manoeuvred and actually manipulated a new agreement for GPs, general practitioners, under which the whole of the out-of-hours time was passed over to the private sector.
Do you have any idea why that happened?
I don't understand why.
You know why it happened?
I think it was let me just finish it really quickly. Right. I think it was an absolute disaster. And I think one of the real problems we've got now, because thank God I think the NHS as such has been saved, but we have a real problem regardless of whether they're Labour, Lib Dem or Conservative, and that is to get back to a contract in which GPs take some responsibility for patients in that what are not the official hours, because at the moment the death rates at weekends and the death rates on, above all on holidays, are substantially higher than they are in normal days, and that's because GPs are no longer held to be responsible overall for their patients through 24 hours,
You want to just pick up on that point?
Well, I'm sure the GP contract does need looking at again.
But was it wrong? Was it a disaster?
Well, the reason why we introduced it at the time is we couldn't get doctors to be GPs, and certainly in deprived areas like my own constituency, we just could not get people in to be GPs there, and people would be like they wouldn't be able to get on a GP list, and then they'd have to appeal to get on a GP list, and once they'd got on a GP list they couldn't get an appointment for more than 10 days. And so actually we did have to change the contract to encourage people to become GPs, and now we do have a good enough supply of GPs. But yes, there are problems with the GP contract, and so it probably should be looked at again, but that's the reason why we did it.
Woman in red there, and then I come to you, sir, the Yellow Town. Yes.
I would question whether we have got enough GPs. My daughter's a GP. She loved her job. She's beginning to get very frustrated. My son-in-law has moved out of the National Health Service. He's just too frustrated and moved away. They are dying to do their job well, and they're unable to do so because of the present system. It really needs attention.
All right. And you, sir?
I died 4 times at a recent bank holiday in our local hospital, but clearly I'm still here. So thank you to the NHS. What worries me is all the meddling that's going on. We now have this NHS 111. So I went round to our local doctor's surgery, and they were not really in a position to give me much information about it, and said, I tell you what, ring up our out-of-hours number and you might get some help that way. I think it's all this constant meddling that's going on that annoys us, the public.
All right. And you, sir, on the gangway there?
I did read the other day that something like 208 parliamentarians who were involved in the voting for the Health and Social Care Bill actually had links to private healthcare providers. Is that not a massive conflict of interest and something that needs to be seriously looked at?
Justine Greening, is it true?
Well, I think if you have any links like that, you have to declare them in the Register of Members' Interests. So transparency is the key thing, and of course that's what MPs have to do. So if they were speaking in that debate, they'd have to set out any financial interests that they had in advance of that. But I just want to come back. I just want to come back on part of what Harriet said. At the end of the day, we picked up an NHS that had so many targets that it actually stopped great professionals from getting on with their job. That's one of the reasons why we had the Mid Staffordshire scandal. What we tried to do is take the bureaucrats out of the NHS and start beefing up the actual frontline staff who are able to provide care for patients. And that's the strategy that we've got, and I think that will lead to a significantly improved NHS service over time, and protecting the budget to be able to do that.
But I must say to Justine that I think the original Lansley bill would have been a disaster. I think it would have privatised the NHS, and I think the reasons it's been massively changed is because of the work of the Liberal Democrats in the coalition.
Can I just go to Elizabeth Wakefield to ask the question? Is it being answered for you or to your satisfaction or not?
You just mentioned about getting people onto the front line. Well, actually, a lot of A&E places are being closed down, and actually that's leading to longer times for people to actually get to acute care, and it's actually building up more capacity in those acute areas.
And the woman in green there?
I'm a senior lecturer in nursing, and I'm teaching students who, first of all, are incredibly frustrated and demoralised because they're being told, actually, you know, people think we don't care, actually we want to be there and care for patients and give that direct care. And what we're seeing is that, in fact, you know, student nurse places are being cut. The investment that is being made into the health service is going into reorganisation rather than actually putting staff into the front line, and those shortages are what's actually impacting on patient care. And no, I wouldn't trust the Tories with the NHS.
If you're worried about the NHS being strapped for cash, which people always have to worry about because there's growing demand, why did the government throw away £3 billion on a top-down reorganisation that they promised in their manifesto they absolutely wouldn't do?
You doubled the health service budget, almost all of which went on wages.
All right.
No, David, please.
Hang on a second. I want to bring Victoria Coren in first, then I'll come to you.
Sorry, fine.
Victoria Coren.
I'm just amused that you shout that that's peanuts. You want to take away all people's bus passes because you think we can't afford it. You pick and choose, don't you?
Have you looked at the size of the NHS budget? I know arithmetic's not
I look
your
at it
strong
daily.
point,
now, what the gentleman said there before, I think that's very interesting about the 111. You see, I agree that everybody knows that's going to be a disaster. But I didn't like the NHS Direct much. I don't understand why, when I was a child, your GP would come round if there was an emergency. People would give anything for that. There is so much. There's suffering people in this country, however money we don't have. People would give up so much to know that their local doctor would just come over on a Sunday night when a child was ill or a temperature was soaring and they were frightened. They don't want to ring NHS Direct and wait for somebody to ring them back with questions. And there are things, you can't just keep saying there's no money to everything. Sometimes you have to prioritise something, and I think that would be probably #1 for most people. If they or their loved ones were ill, a doctor that they know, that lives locally, would come round and treat them. And I think doctors would be happy to do it if they were paid enough out of hours. They don't like outsourcing all this stuff either.
I think they're prepared to reconsider it, actually, now.
It's one of those things, and I think we should just make a list of all the things we want, whether it's bus passes or cheap clothes, or all the various things that money buys, and get people to vote. And I think a doctor that would come around and see you when you're ill would be top.
OK. David Starkey.
I think to bring home the utter unreality of Labour policy on the health service, in 2004, when Patricia Hewitt was Secretary of State and the new GP contract was introduced, would we all like to estimate what Labour thought it was worth to a doctor not to have to get up in the middle of the night and not to get up at weekends? How much was that costed at? 20,000, 30? How much would you pay? Shall I tell you? It was costed at £6,000. Now, if you have a minister and a government that has got so little sense of reality as that, this is the mess we're left with. We've also got, again, to face facts. The NHS has got the best paid doctors outside America. Doctors in Britain are paid double what they are in France and getting on for 2/3 more than even they are in Germany. That's what happened under Labour. And the third thing is, ladies and gentlemen, we've got to stop treating the NHS as though it was a national religion, that it was a credo, that we'd all got to bow down before. Other countries do it better. We always make the comparison with America. That is the wrong comparison. Our European neighbours, France and Germany, run the health system infinitely better. The NHS is the world's largest single organisation, apart from the Chinese army, and it's very badly run. It's so big that it's almost completely unmanageable with the best will in the world. But so long as we continue to kowtow, to worship, we say we mustn't touch it, we'll never do anything with it.
I'm sorry, there are at least two major international organisations, the OECD, which is all the industrial countries in the world, and the Commonwealth Fund of Massachusetts, which is a leading research body, which do not say that about the NHS. They say that it is a remarkable achievement, and it is. And although I completely agree with David on one thing, which is the GP contract, and with Victoria, must be looked at again, it just isn't right or fair to suggest that the NHS is other than a quite remarkable public service.
All right. The woman in the third row there. Yes, you.
I work in the NHS and have done so for about 15 years. I personally think that any government that comes into power, because the NHS is such a key institution in the country, they try to make a mockery of it in a way. They want to make a mark within the NHS, and they always get it wrong. The reforms that have been made, the changes that started in April, by the way, are just a change of brand. It's just a brand change. Exactly the same problems. We're seeing exactly the same problems. There are absolutely no changes. We're finding it difficult to put patient at the centre, which should be the focus of the NHS. So I'm afraid everybody has failed. Both the Labour government and the Tory government have failed.
And just to get it clear, you think politicians always want to do something about the NHS because it's such an important thing, and therefore they interfere when they shouldn't?
I think they're not the best people. They're not well placed to dictate what goes on. They should leave it to the frontline staff. We're better equipped to do so because we're facing patients.
Do you agree with that, Shirley Williams?
Well, I think it's what they think the Social Health and Social Care Act is doing, because it has put almost all the budget in the hands of GPs. And before that, the money was in the hands of managers.
The problem with some of that is some of those GPs have also got interest in private health provision, where they're actually running private clinics. And the difficulty is some of them will be commissioning services from companies that actually they are making a profit out of. And that's a terrible conflict of interest.
They can't do it. You haven't seen the amendments which have made it the case that no GP who's got an interest in any other private medical body can actually take part in a decision at all. And if he does, hang on, I'm just telling a fact. I happen to move this amendment.
You a fact too.
No, sorry, you weren't moving the amendment, and I was.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you just give me a minute, I'll finish, and it'll go over to you. I just want to finish by saying that I actually believe that the issue of conflict of interest, which was serious, the gentleman up there was right about MPs, but I think it has been addressed in a very, very direct and very tough way.
So the point that I was wanting to make is all GPs are private for-profit companies. That is what was set up under the health service at the very beginning. GPs are self-employed partnerships. They are running for profit. So all of this stuff about privatising the National Health Service is hokum.
Okay.
Labour began under Aneurin Bevan saying he was going to stuff the doctors' mouths with gold, and that's the way the thing has been run from the very beginning, and it is turning into disaster. What you said is very interesting, the lady there in the orange jacket, about health service professionals knowing how to run the health service. I agree with you. Unfortunately, somebody has got to pay for it. Health is rapidly becoming the largest boom area of the whole budget. It's uncontrollable in all countries.
OK, David. You, sir, in the check shirt.
The duty of the chief executive of a company is to make a profit for the shareholders. So everything that is privatised is primarily for the shareholders, not for the patients. And the second point is, if Harriet Harman gets her party to commit to change all these ridiculous nonsense things that have been happening, then she may get some votes in the next general election.
All right, and you in the second row.
I think all this doctor bashing is absolutely disgraceful. I think the NHS is what it is because of the hard work that doctors do. And most of my family work for the NHS, and they're dedicated, emotionally, work around the clock. And I think for you to talk about how much they're paid, I think, is just doing them a huge injustice. They're not paid enough. Why not stuff their mouths with gold?
Come on.
If I spend my money on taxes, if I could spend it on anything, it would be the NHS.
That's fine.
And the doctors that keep it afloat.
That's you. But lots of people do their jobs properly.
All right.
That doesn't mean that we don't
Not
look
all
at
of them save lives.
No,
You'll be appreciating it if you need the NHS.
They chose to be doctors, and they do a job, and I agree with you. I think on the whole they do it very, very well. But sorry, they are incredibly well paid.
One last point.
Disproportionately well paid.
David Starkey
David, I go to private hospitals, which are very much better.
We're coming.
They may be run for profit.
David.
No, they're not.
You're infinitely better.
All right, we're coming.
No.
We're coming.
My thumb speaks.
David, we're coming. Yes, we'll have to hit you on that thumb if you don't stop talking. We've got to stop.
The lady that first asked the question,
What?
though, which was just, is the NHS safe in this government's hands? It seems like probably no, but the safest assumption is it isn't safe in any government's hands, and we should keep an eye on it. And as far as I understand it, this healthcare bill, doctors and nurses unions are against it. And much though David Starkey mightn't like it, people trust doctors, and if they don't want it, we shouldn't go with it.
All right. I'm sorry to say time's up. We're going to be in Coventry next week. Germaine Greer, David Davies for the Tories, Tristram Hunt for Labour. And the week after that, it's Ipswich. So if you want to come to either Coventry next week or Ipswich the week after, there's the address on the screen. Our telephone number 0330 123 99 88. You'll be rung up. We'll be very glad to see you. My thanks to our panel here and to all of you who came to Dartford for this edition of Question Time. And until next Thursday, good night.
More political discussion on the way, a special audience edition of This Week, next on BBC One.